Hello and welcome to Middle East Matters. Coming up in this edition, residents flee the Syrian city of Raqqa as the fight to oust Islamic State jihadists from their de facto capital continues. We meet some of the people who escaped. We report from Lebanon, where refugees who fled the fighting in Syria say new residency rules are making their lives impossible. We're heading to one of the world's top tourist destinations, Istanbul, where recent suicide attacks have seen visitor numbers plummet. We start in Syria, where it's been 2 years now since the city of Raqqa fell to the Islamic State group. Now the coalition fighting the jihadists hopes their de facto capital could be retaken by the end of the year. As their forces advance, dozens of residents are trying to leave. France 24's Fernand Van Tetz has more on the kind of life they're attempting to escape.
Ahmed and his family fled Raqqa last month. Traumatized and afraid of reprisals from the Islamic State group, they talked to us anonymously.
Now they're displaying the decapitated bodies at the entrance to Raqqa's main street. They do this to frighten us, to show us how we will end up if we don't respect their laws. For example, if you're caught smoking 3 times, you are brought before a judge. If he has shown clemency, he will just cut off your hand. If not, he will cut off your head.
I pray to God that he will rid us of this ball.
In order to get out of Raqqa, many hide under trucks. All talk about a life which is unbearable. Syria says she's most angry about the foreign fighters who rule the city.
There, everything is reserved for fighters of the Islamic State group. The restaurants, the shops, everything is for them. But the people have nothing. Bread is now 10 times as expensive. All these foreign fighters say they're going to fight jihad, but we're suffering. We're hungry. They impose Sharia and hit women. This is their jihad. It's a jihad against the Syrian people.
It's a war that even jihadists themselves try to escape from. These men, who are fighting against the Islamic State group, are involved in helping them escape.
Our informants on the ground tell us that more and more fighters are leaving the IS group after their last defeat. Every day, groups of 20 or 30 or 40 fighters are arrested on the Turkish border while trying to flee abroad.
A few days ago, a French woman was here.
I've been in Raqqa for 1 year and in Syria for 1.5 years.
A convert to Islam, she went to join the jihad with her son and husband, and after the latter died, she begged these men for help. They say she's on her way back to France.
She told me that she'd realized that the Islamic State organization is a killing machine, that the jihadists have no respect at all for Muslims and deprive them of their dignity. At the moment, we're in contact with other French jihadists who want to flee, but of course we can't give you any exact details of these operations until they're completed.
Stories like this only reinforce the determination of these fighters, who say they will do whatever it takes to take back Raqqa.
Well, next to Lebanon, the tiny nation that's bearing the brunt of the refugee crisis caused by the war in neighbouring Syria. With a population of just 4 million, it's taken in over 1 million people from over the border. But now many refugees say their lives are grinding to a halt as new measures make it almost impossible for them to obtain or renew residency permits.
After fleeing the war in Syria, Walid ended up here at the Shatila refugee camp in Beirut. But with an expired residence permit, he's now afraid to go anywhere, and renewing it costs around €175, on top of registering through the UN or paying a Lebanese sponsor.
Our sponsor says either you pay or I won't renew your permit. That's what's happening. And if we renew it through the UN, then we're not allowed to work.
Lebanon hasn't ratified the 1951 Refugee Convention mandating protection for refugees. Those like Mohammed, who can't pay for new permits, fear they'll be arrested or deported if they leave the camp.
We live in a large prison. Imagine what it's like seeing police officers and not dare walk in front of them. I used to walk to the border every 6 months before. I'd renew my permit and come back. But with the new measures, I've been living here illegally for 1 year and 2 months.
According to the UN, by the end of March 2016, 56% of Syrians didn't have a valid residence permit. For families like Radia's, it's simply unaffordable.
My husband works in an orphanage. He makes about 300 euros a month. That's barely enough to cover rent and food. I have 2 kids. How can I pay 175 euros for him, 175 for myself, on top of finding a sponsor? We can't.
Of the 4 million residents in Lebanon, over 1.1 million are registered Syrian refugees, making it the world's highest refugee-to-resident ratio.
Every little detail of their life. It's like living, if you can hear it or you can hear it from them, it's like living in a constant fear. And they feel, or at least that's what they say, they are pushed to become invisible.
Lebanese authorities say the criticism is unfounded and the measures have in fact made it easier to obtain the permits. But for the time being, refugees feel forced to continue hiding in the camps, far from prying eyes.
Well, next to Istanbul, where recent violence having a devastating impact on tourism. The Turkish city is one of the world's top 10 destinations, but 2 suicide attacks this year have seen both visitor numbers and hotel prices nosediving. On the cusp of summer, the tourist industry is planning for a difficult season. This from our correspondents Fatma Kizilboga and Matthew Salah.
This is, famously, the only city in the world set over 2 continents. Istanbul, long a favourite destination with foreign tourists. Last year, over 10 million visitors came to the city. But after 2 suicide attacks attributed to IS since the beginning of the year, tourists are few and far between. On Istiklal, the scene of the last explosion, people are having difficulty overcoming the trauma.
After the bombing, this street was empty. There weren't even as many people as you see here today. People are only now starting to come back.
I feel safe because everywhere we going in, they're checking our bags, they're checking our stuff, so on that side we feel safe.
Bag searches have become routine when entering public spaces, but it makes no difference. In 40 years of business, this storekeeper at the Egyptian Bazaar says he has never seen the place so empty.
We're afraid. Even I'm afraid. We get nervous when it's crowded. I used to feel safe coming to work in the morning, but now we worry if we'll get home in one piece. We asked for extra security, not just for us, but for the folks who come here.
Behind the facade of this historic building is one of the most prized hotels in the city.
This is our 3-bedroom penthouse with its own kitchen. Right now it's a great value. We used to be about 900 euro per day. Right now it's 400.
Expecting a catastrophic season, Turkish hotel owners have slashed prices to survive the crisis.
Things are very bad compared to last year. Both prices and occupancy are down 35 to 40%. We've had to cut prices up to 45% in order to achieve the same occupancy as last year.
According to experts, tourism income could drop by 10 billion euros and 130,000 jobs could be lost. In this restaurant in the historic district of Sultanahmet, they have not given up yet.
I'm expanding my market, but it's not enough. We've done all right so far, but our debts are starting to pile up.
Turkish government promised 80 million euros of assistance to the tourist industry to help it overcome the crisis, which threatens to topple one of the pillars of the Turkish economy.
And finally to Gaza, a place all too often associated with war and hardship. But among the alleyways of the crowded old city lies a relic that's managed to survive for over 400 years and has recently been restored to its former glory. Claire Williams has details.
Tucked away in Gaza's maze of alleyways lies this hidden world. A tiny Levantine palace with its traditional patio and high stone walls. In a place ravaged by decades of conflict, it's a rare and unexpected sight. And it's home to the Salameh family.
At first, I was against the idea of moving in here. It didn't make any sense in the 21st century to live in a house that's more than 430 years old. And the state of the house didn't encourage me either.
Last year, Kawatar's husband fell in love with the house, even though it only had half a roof. The family began renovating it, but the Israeli blockade meant they struggled to find the building materials they needed.
Some of the materials used for restoration, the wood for example, don't exist in the Gaza Strip because they're prevented from entering by Israeli authorities. We faced many problems because this house requires very specific types of wood.
Their friends thought they were either crazy or had been scammed, but a year later, the house is getting back to its former glory. Many of the houses it once stood next to are in ruins or have been razed to the ground. Gaza's architecture bears the signs of pharaohs, Romans, Byzantines, early Christians and Muslims as they passed through the Mediterranean port. But architectural heritage here is being lost.
Due to the intensification of the Palestinian uprising and the repeated wars, archaeological sites have been neglected because all the financial support goes to rebuilding demolished homes and damaged streets and infrastructure. So the archaeological sites have fallen by the wayside.
International organizations like UNESCO fund the restoration and upkeep of historic buildings and sites, like the remains of this 4th century monastery. But for small-scale initiatives like the Salame's home, Gazans rely on their own savings.
And that's it for this week's edition of Middle East Matters. Thanks ever so much for